On this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Don't you realize we're there? The food is actually cheap enough. How about anything to make food better?
The amount of food that comes off cattails is just staggering.
One of the most productive plants in the world in terms of biomass per acre per year.
Sometimes it seems like we talk about climate change at the expense of more pressing things like habitat.
The great ecological issue of our time is herbicide. We're no longer in the plow agriculture age. We are in the herbicide agriculture age.
Killing a plant that was there when the pyramids were built. What a travesty. Put some glyphosate on that.
For me as a kid, I was protein starved. I didn't have any money, so crayfish was great. I could catch them with my hands and there's protein.
That was really fun. I felt like a little kid yesterday just picking those up.
We are in the aftermath of colonialism. If we can take what this continent offers to people, we have a paradise. Let's start living in it like it's really here, like we belong here.
Episode 147 of the WildFed podcast, Herbicide, Habitat, and Edibility with Sam Thayer, is brought to you by Surthrival. If you're looking to increase testosterone levels without turning to pharmaceutical testosterone replacement therapy, take a look at Surthrival's pine pollen. Pine pollen is a rich source of naturally occurring testosterone and a suite of other androgenic hormones that can be used to gently boost your T levels. Right now until the end of August, the coupon code RESTORE20 gets you 20% off all pine pollen products at surthrival.com. My favorite is Surthrival's Pine Pollen Pure Potency. It's an herbal elixir I formulated with stinging nettle root to keep your body's free testosterone levels up while the pine pollen gently boosts them. It's got Siberian ginseng for hormone upregulation and maple syrup, vanilla bean, and orange peel to give it an incredible orange creamsicle flavor. Stop by surthrival.com to check out the entire pine pollen lineup, including pine pollen powder, pine pollen tincture, and of course, pine pollen pure potency, Surthrival's flagship pine pollen product. These are formulas I use and stand by, and so do thousands of other men who've used them too. For the rest of August, use the coupon code RESTORE20 for 20% off all pine pollen products at surthrival.com. Hunting season is right around the corner. If you dream of being able to successfully and sustainably harvest food from the land, this might be your perfect next step. Learning to hunt can be overwhelming, especially without a mentor. From finding land to hunt on, to developing the skills, to learning to process your harvest and finding people with shared values you can hunt with. The Hunter's Journey is a thriving online course and community with mentors ready to guide you from where you are now to becoming a successful hunter. Their team believes in stewardship of the land, reverence for the species that they hunt, and respect for all people. Many of their students got out on their first successful hunts last season utilizing what they'd learned through the Hunter's Journey. And remember, even if you're not quite ready to harvest an animal yourself, you can apply these same skills to shooting with your camera. The Hunter's Journey has a special offer just for WildFed listeners. Visit thehuntersjourney.com and enter the coupon code WildFed100 to get $100 off the course. Again, that's thehuntersjourney.com and the coupon code is WildFed100. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. My guest today is none other than Sam Thayer. If you're serious about wild foods, you've probably read Sam's incredible books, The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and Incredible Wild Edibles. They've become the gold standard in plant foraging by setting a new benchmark for what readers should expect from authors on the topic. Sam set the record straight on several plants, but also chose to only write about plants with which he had a lot of real-world experience. These aren't simple one-paragraph entries saying such and such plant is edible. Rather, these were in-depth monograph-type chapters that gave foragers tools for finding, identifying, and really eating these species. Up until then, most foraging literature was more about trail nibbling or novelty than it was about making these foods a serious part of your diet. I was recently in Sam's home state of Wisconsin filming with him for an episode of season 3 of the WildFed TV show, and we got to sit down and talk about our time together, about wild foods and foraging, but also about another academic interest of his, the shocking origins of anthropology and why something he calls agrocentrism was perhaps the most important underlying belief that allowed for the marginalization of foraging people, hunter-gatherers, by colonialism. This is essentially the belief that farming is what makes us human, and that foraging peoples, hunter-gatherers, were a primitive form of human or even subhuman. Now, of course, that sounds pretty repugnant today and biologically untrue, but it was a well-accepted belief amongst the European intellectual elite at the time when anthropology was first becoming a credible field of science. It not only permeated the field, but is recorded, as will be shown in a forthcoming book that Sam's working on now, in the writings of many of the foundational thinkers of anthropology at that time. While these ideas seem outmoded today, one doesn't have to look far to see that the shadow of these ideas is still very present in our world, as folks interested in wild food well know. After all, it's no mystery that the general public thinks of hunting and gathering as something from the past, or for the poorest peoples of the world, or something you do in a survival situation. Certainly, it's not a viable way to live anymore. Agrocentrism is an implicit bias, and those that hold it aren't usually aware of it. Rather, it's something they just assume to be true without any conscious thought. But rethinking what we believe about human food acquisition could be critical to finding truly ecologically sound, sustainable, and human-healthy food systems in the future. Sam has presented the idea of ecoculture as an alternative approach to agriculture, and there's a great essay about that in his book, Nature's Incredible Edibles. Lastly, I'll just say that Sam is a man of many talents, and this goes beyond mere plant identification, writing, teaching, and philosophizing on the origins of agriculture. It turns out he also has a knack for song, as anyone who spent an evening with him around the campfire already knows. It took some convincing, but he performed a great piece for us, rather impromptu at the end of the interview, so stick around because you won't want to miss that. Sam, if you're listening, it's always great to connect with you and your family. Thanks again for hosting us, making an episode of the TV show, and for coming back on the podcast again. You're a legend, and I don't give out that compliment lightly.
Sam Thayer, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here again.
I'm happy to be here again.
This time, though, we're at your place, which is cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
How many woods did you say was in here?
There's 27 different species of wood visible.
Mm-hmm. Very cool, man. And Grant Giuliano.
Hey, guys.
Producer of WildFed.
Great to be here.
Back in the house. We're in Wisconsin and just been having a wonderful time with you these last few days. So thank you for your hospitality, and thanks for showing us around and exposing us to some new things. That Cattail Laterals foraging trip was about the most sort of immersive and harrowing forage that I've ever done.
If I can get someone who's willing to go into the muck and get cattail laterals with me and willing to go up to the pine barrens with me, I'm all yours.
Well, it was awesome. That trip up there was awesome too. I hadn't really, you had mentioned the kettles to me before, but I hadn't seen them. And I think living in a place like I do, I just would have saw it as hills and valleys. And until you pointed out, and then it was really obvious. But describe to people what those kettles are and sort of the overall effect that the glaciers have had here.
Well, a kettle is formed where a glacier dumps a bunch of stuff, rocks, gravel, sand, and big chunks of ice. And then after the glacier recedes, when that ice that's buried melts, the depression left behind is a kettle. Yeah. And there's all sorts, all different sizes and shapes. But the most, there's not all different sizes, right? Because some of them, they're only so big. There's... But you get real steep ones where you can really just practically see in your mind's eye that chunk of ice melting and watch the sand collapsing as you envision it. And for me, growing up in this glacial landscape, they call it the Wisconsin glaciation, and growing up here and hearing these terms about kettles and kames and moraines and eskers, I had an actual moment when I was about 23, when I was ricing and I was carrying a canoe on the top of an esker.
What's an esker?
An esker is a ridge of material left where there was a stream flowing or a river flowing in a glacier. And it could have been like on top of the glacier or like in a crevasse between glaciers, and then it deposited like a wall of stuff. And then when the glacier melted, you had this like ridge that sort of collapsed. And so instead of being the low point, it was now the high point.
Wow.
And I was...
It's all silts and stuff from that that flowage?
Depending on how the water was flowing, it could be various textures of material. Sure. So this particular place, I carry the canoe across the top of an esker. It's about a 26-mile long esker, but I don't carry it that far. Mm-hmm. But and all of a sudden, it just occurred to me what an esker was. Like I remembered, and I was like, oh, I can just see it. Like I could just imagine the glacier. I could imagine the glacier melting, and I could imagine the sand sort of, oozing to the side and forming this long, narrow ridge. And from that moment on, I've been utterly fascinated with glacial geology, and it started to connect all these dots that didn't make sense to me. Like why I would see a certain plant in one place and not another. I realized it's all about the geology, which around here was determined by glaciers. So we have something called the ice-walled lake plain. It's where there was a lake between ice walls. And then, again, when the glaciers melted, that went from being the lowest point on the landscape to the highest point. So they're
because the glaciers had depressed the land.
Because
the lake.
Imagine the glaciers were 6,000 feet high.
Oh yeah,
and then the lake was low between the glaciers, and it was the low point. But so everything accumulated there because it was the low point. Yeah. But then when the glacier was gone, it's now a plateau. Yeah. But it has a different texture soil than any other place. So, for example, in northern Wisconsin, those are the only places where ginseng and mayapple grow. Is ice wall lake plains. So connecting those dots was really helpful for me.
Is the world of botany make that connection, or are botanists and geologists too siloed for that? Cross-pollination of understanding.
When I read plant ecology stuff from, say, like 1960 and earlier, it seems like there's a real understanding of the connection between the geology and the botany. It's still there, but it seems like it's getting weaker. It seems like it's becoming, it's becoming more compartmentalized.
It's interesting to think back. It wasn't that long ago that people saw all this as the work of a great artist, and fairly recently in the human epoch, and now we're finally understanding sort of geological time, but it wasn't that long ago people would have assumed this was made in 6 days. So kind of fascinating to understand actually, and to get that picture in your mind's eye of what actually took place, because it's like tracking, right? It's like you're looking at the tracks of a glacier.
Exactly. When I was a kid, I used to read Tom Brown's books, and I thought about tracking in terms of following an animal, and I still do. But there's so much vegetation tracking you can do.
I've been watching you do it all week.
And glacial tracking.
You've been describing, because the first time you and I hung out in person, you started telling me, oh, this forest used to be like this and like this and like this. And I'm like, how is he deducing all of this? But two things I've noticed this week is the kinds of questions you ask are very investigative. So you'll see something and then you start digging in. Why is it like that? Why is that here? But the other thing is that you're tracking the forest, or you're tracking the plain, or you're tracking the prairie, and you're saying, hey, those plants are here because they were the understory to this forest in the past, and that's the only way they could be here. And blah, blah, and you are tracking, and that's really cool to see.
Yeah, and it's really cool to do. I spent my life answering questions that I started asking as a child, like, why is there hemlock here but no hemlock here? Simple questions like that. And now I feel like slowly I'm getting the answers.
Yeah. Wow. And you took us out to do a little bit of you say crayfish here?
People say crayfish normally in Wisconsin.
Yeah. We were reading about it on the drive home last night. Grant was reading the Wikipedia to me, and it was
crayfish, crawfish, crawdad, yabbies, crawdaddy.
I like crawdaddy. So obviously they're regional, and so you get down south, and it was crawdad. But then as you went all the way south, it changes to crawfish, where it's crayfish up here.
I think it's crayfish up north. In mid-coast, it's crawfish. I think, and down south it's crawdad. Yeah.
And in French, it's écrevisse.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Crayfish.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a literal translation? Anyway, that was really fun. I felt like a little kid yesterday, just picking those up and getting the hang of learning how to snag them and figuring out different techniques, because they seems like they can't really move quickly anyway except in retreat, right? Backwards. They retreat backwards with their tail. So once you kind of are onto them, you can get them to play into your hand a little bit. But they are clever and good at evading you. But there's like some part of the brain that you tap into where you are in absolute presence. I love that. I find that I'm not thinking of any. It's like a moving meditation. I'm not thinking about anything but the present moment. And I just couldn't stop. Like when the production guys were going to get some lunch and do some, I just went back down there and started picking up more of them. I couldn't stop, you know.
Yeah, well, I went to look for bullfrogs, and I came back, and I'm like, "Where's Daniel?" And I'm like, "Oh, I bet she's catching crayfish." And the reason I thought that is because that's what I want to do. Then I go down there, and we come back with like 15 more.
Yeah. I watched Alan start cooking them up yesterday, and
There was 101 of them. How long do you think we were down there?
Oh, it's hard to say because
couple hours.
The camera guys were slowing us down.
That's true. But even with us slowing you down, a couple hours. 101.
And Alan wasn't prolific with his catching, so I think you and I probably snagged 20-something each, you know. No, 50-something, probably, I would say,
40.
45 apiece.
Alan said he thought he caught 8.
Yeah, so it's like, even with just your hands, my point is, not to make fun of Alan. Alan, I hope you're not listening. You did great, Alan. You did great. The thing is, if I had a little net, I feel like I could be even more efficient, but just with my hands still, it's like, you know, or a trap, I think is how most people would do it, right? So you'd put some bait in a trap and let them
the trapping is very effective.
But still, I mean, just your hands, easy to gather enough protein for a really good meal, so.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a kid, I was protein starved, and if I could, you know, I didn't have any money, so crayfish was great. You know, I could catch them with my hands, and there's protein.
And you said you just boil them in a pot of salted water?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty simple cooking when you're 12. You know?
Yeah. Necessity is the mother of invention.
And then you'd eat the tail?
The tail and the claws, and sometimes, you know, tear apart the front and see there's a little bit there. You know, you try to get, if you're not too grossed out by it, you know, when you're just getting used to eating these things. But so I'm excited to see what Alan has made. Although, I mean, you're camping and you're hungry. They're great.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, watching him cook them last night, just like you see with other shellfish from the ocean, you know, all that I think it's probably astaxanthin comes out, you know, when they start to heat, and then you see all that beautiful red, orange color, you know. So we watched him cook the carapaces and claws for the stock, and then he took a piece of cheesecloth and put all the tails, because I went through and took the tails off all of them last night, all the big ones. So he wrapped those in a cheesecloth and set those into the broth to cook, and then we'll pick those tonight. So we'll pick the tails separate, but yeah, that was. And really
they're a freshwater crustacean, but when he started cooking them, he just had olive oil in, and then he put the bodies in, and it did not smell anything like a freshwater fish. It smelled like something from the ocean, I would say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I get a little put off by freshwater foods because of the pollution compared to the diluted ocean. So sometimes the idea of eating, you know, if it's like like I like to catch trout in mountain streams in Maine, you know, they feel really clean to me, but I don't like to fish in the lakes very much. Or we were looking at freshwater clams yesterday, and I'm always like a little cringy about it. I don't know.
The cool thing about the crayfish is they can't really handle polluted water very well. At least I was reading on Wikipedia last night. So.
Well, I can't really find any water without crayfish.
Yeah.
You know, so
I'm
not sure I believe it.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But anyway, the point, you know, I say that to say when he started cooking them, I was like very attracted to them as food. Yeah. So I feel like that was great. But the cattail laterals, can we talk about that for a moment as well? Because that was just fascinating. We went out into probably waist to chest deep water and muck that was anywhere between ankle and knee deep, depending on where you stepped. And, you know, pulling those out, sometimes even like a diving experience of like fully going underwater. But tell us about what they are and what that food is like.
Yeah, so you think of a spear-like asparagus shoot, like growing straight up and with that pointed tip. Well, I call the term lateral shoot, I coined some years ago because I never found any other term for.
Oh, that's your term when you say lateral?
When I say lateral, yeah. So I shortened it from lateral shoot. So it's the rhizome growing sideways, and it also has a pointed tip. And that's actually the hardest part of that lateral because it's pushing through stuff.
Right.
So it's rapidly expanding and it's extremely tender. And that cattail did not expect anybody to go under there and dig it up. I guess muskrats, do.
Yeah.
So it's sweet and it's so tender. I mean, you figured this out, but you got to be really careful pulling them out because they want to break in half because they're just so incredibly tender.
Yeah, and they've got kind of that color of like one of those sun-starved asparagus sticks, like that pale color because they're down there deep under. And like you said, they're so sweet and so soft. You can tell that the plant hasn't done much to try to protect or defend them. The amount of food that comes off cattails is just staggering.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most productive plants in the world in terms of biomass per acre per year. In fact, it may be the most productive plant in the
Yeah,
world.
because I just feel no concern about having a negative impact on the colony when I'm out there.
Well, and if you see a cattail marsh where trapping is not allowed, and the muskrat numbers reach these incredible, muskrats reach these incredible densities, and they're feeding really heavily on the rhizomes of cattail, burr reed, and all these same plants that are edible to humans.
Yeah, you described it as like the softest vegetable you'd ever put in your mouth, which I was like, is he exaggerating? And then I crunched down on one. It's like, wow, it really is a beautiful texture. I mean, you just can't imagine somebody disliking it unless, like I think you made the comment, like unless they don't eat vegetables.
Yeah. I mean, if people eat vegetables and they try this one, they're going to say, oh, that's good.
Yeah. Oh, it's wild when you came up with it. It looks like a tusk or something, the first one I saw. Anyway, knowing they're there, I'm pretty excited about it for the future. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, though, was we had gone out looking for 13-line ground squirrels. And this is a species I'm not really familiar with living where I live. So maybe we'll set the stage by just like you talk a little bit about them. And there's obviously been a shifting baseline here for people because today the numbers seem to be different than they were that you remember as a kid. So maybe tell us a little bit about that and about their ecology, and then let's get into how you catch them and maybe what's happening with them.
So 13-line ground squirrel is a dry prairie and pine barrens native species. And actually, after Europeans settled in the upper Midwest, their range and numbers expanded pretty dramatically. They expanded several hundred miles east of where they had been previously
because of land clearing.
Because of the clearing, and then the fires after the clearing, and then agricultural clearing.
Okay.
But over the last 60, 80 years, they've been steadily declining. And in my life, we've seen, most of the pine barrens areas and prairie areas grow up into brushland or to young forests. And so they've disappeared from those areas. But I grew up catching 13-line ground squirrels in lawns, in terms of it could be people's yards or parks or, ball fields around beaches. I mean, this is something my brother and I did on a regular basis every summer. And we also caught a lot of snakes, bull snakes and fox snakes, our two largest snakes in this region. And those snakes have precipitously declined, especially the bull snake. And the 13-line ground squirrels have also declined dramatically. So they're very rarely seen in lawns anymore. But interestingly, just 3 years ago, our closest municipality here that has a ball field and a park and cemetery and school grounds, 3 years ago, there was many 13-line ground squirrels there. There's none now. So part of this is because of intentional eradication. People just don't like them in their yards. But a big part of it is the almost universal application of herbicide to lawns now. And so we talk about, biodiversity being important. Well, if you have one grass in your lawn, that can't support a ground squirrel. If you have 3 grasses and you have plantain and you have dandelion, you have a little bit of salsify, you have some clover, you have some birdfoot trefoil, all of a sudden you have a diversity there high enough to support ground squirrels. So and you're talking hundreds of thousands of acres of habitat just in Wisconsin, and multiply that by every state. I mean, they have declined dramatically in the last 30 years, and no one's talking about it.
So the application of pesticides is not intended to eradicate the ground squirrel, though they are seen as a pest by a lot of landowners. But it's actually the reduction in the plants that they would be consuming in order to have more uniform grass.
Exactly.
This obsession with the uniform lawn, man.
Must have the perfect lawn.
What is it? What is it?
Something to water.
Is it deep psychological memory of the savanna? Is it obsession from grass-eating cultures that subsist exclusively almost on modified grasses? Like, why? You know what I mean? Like, you got corn eater, rice eater, wheat eater, barley eater. Is it that? Is it just because it's pretty? Like, why this obsession with grass?
Well, I have one hypothesis that our ancestors evolved in a place that has poisonous snakes, and they like to be able to see everything that's there.
Yeah.
But also, we have an obsession with neatness. I mean, we see that in order in nature. Order indicates organization, and organization indicates vitality. So that's why we see, perfect symmetry is what animals are attracted to in each other, but it seems to be what human beings are attracted to in objects we create is symmetry.
Sure.
So we take a lawn and we want it to look perfect, just right, like a nice piece of leather, a nice cloth, so we like that smooth texture, and we don't think about the bigger meaning. Nature does not like that texture.
Yeah.
We do. And maybe here's a place where we disagree with nature to our own peril.
I've heard stories about them planting in Iraq, wealthy elites in Iraq planting a material that's like what's inside diapers, the powder that turns to gel when it gets in contact with water, so that they can get enough water in the sand there to grow grasses so they can have lawns. Or a lot of places where we go, like in Arizona, where you see sod rolled out in people's front yards, and around that perfect square of lawn is just desert. And you're like, give me a break. Like, do you have to have this?
And the desert is so beautiful.
Beautiful.
It's so,
Why
I
would
mean,
you? So
I
beautiful.
love the Sonoran Desert.
Same. Any desert. And yeah, I've got this neighbor across the way from me. When I moved to where I live, it was very sparsely populated, but a lot of houses have come in recently. And so I've got quite a long bit of road frontage. And I got a guy across the way, very nice guy. He's a landscaper, though, in Connecticut. And so he's got a second home, and he is lawn obsessed. And he drains into my bog, which has just been massively damaged by all of this runoff from his lawn. Well, the other thing, though, that he was doing is he would mow his lawn, and then he would come across and he would mow my road frontage on my side, like on my property, and I finally had to talk to him and be like, dude, you can't mow my lawn without talking to me. What are you doing? But he needed across the street to look right. He didn't like that I was letting the herbaceous plants grow up. And like I said, great guy, but it's like, wow, he really needs it to be perfect. I mean, his hobby is definitely lawn maintenance, because the number of hours, I mean, you're talking sometimes 10, 20 hours a week.
He's blowing those leaves again.
There's so many podcasts that we can't do, to be like, I have to go over and be like, hey, can you not run that commercial grade leaf blower? Because it just makes such a constant machine whine that we can't produce any media over there. So anyway, just to illustrate, the lawn obsession is deep.
But if somebody gets into birds and butterflies and edible plants and flowers, all of a sudden that obsession starts to get bigger and bigger than the lawn obsession.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got an acquaintance in Chicago dealing with this very problem. She's a member of an HOA, where she lives, and they don't like her native perennial plantings. And we made a rule: no perennial plants are allowed in your yard.
Whoa.
I'm like, she's fighting that right now. It's just baloney.
No perennial plants. Wow. Okay.
Read those.
Can I have a tree or no trees, or what are we talking about here? Yeah, I would not. I would never opt into a road association again. I can tell you that. But anyway, so back to the herbicide application. You made a comment to me yesterday and again today, and actually, let me back up and say, you and I had a conversation the other day. We sort of seemed to agree on this, that the focus on climate change, I think I understand it from a marketing perspective. It's like an easy catch line. It's a catch-all for like everything that you're trying to push forward from an environmental agenda. But there's a lot of gaps and holes in the whole conversation, and a lot of nuance that's lost. And sometimes it seems like we talk about climate change at the expense of talking about more immediate and more pressing things like habitat or like diversity. And people have, I think it's almost like in the public mind, climate has become almost like conflated with things like habitat and biodiversity and protection of endangered species. It just all gets lumped into like climate change, But you and I seem to agree that there are things that are a little more pressing sometimes, that get almost whitewashed out, greenwashed out when we talk about climate.
Absolutely.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, one of our favorite episodes of WildFed Season 1 is now free on YouTube, hosted by My Outdoor TV International. The video name is WildFed Free Preview, but you can also see it on our website, wild-fed.com. It's an episode about harvesting wild rice and hunting black bears, and features a meal with Evan Hennessy, one of New Hampshire's most celebrated chefs. If access to cables kept you from seeing the WildFed TV show, this is a great way to get a taste of the series. The rest of Season 1 is available through Outdoor Channel's streaming service, My Outdoor TV, and Season 2 should be hosted there soon too. Currently, we're busy shooting and producing our third season, and I can hardly wait for you to see it. It'll be debuting this winter, right around the new year. In the meantime, head over to YouTube or wild-fed.com to see a full 22-minute episode. Now, back to the show.
I became a Nature Conservancy volunteer at the age of 14. I became a certified Nature Conservancy spokesperson at the age of 17. So I've been involved a long time
Yeah.
in this. And I've watched climate change as an issue just swallow environmentalism.
Yeah.
So that it can hardly be seen in the belly of that anymore.
Yeah.
I do believe in man-made climate change, and I do believe it's an issue, and I think it's something we need to think about and react to. I mean, I'm off-grid solar here. I have, renewable energy in my house, renewable fuel for my heat in my house.
You pump your drinking water out there by hand.
I pump my own water by hand. I try to have a low-impact lifestyle. But I still think that the biggest environmental concern we have in the world is habitat loss. And I think that the great ecological issue of our time right now is herbicide. Habitat loss is being accelerated with herbicide to an extent that almost is unfathomable. So in 200 years or 100 years, when we look back at this time, we will see this as the time that the native plant communities of the entire earth were largely destroyed with herbicide. So we've been given another tool to destroy nature. And that tool is the biggest change in our repertoire of tools for destroying nature since the internal combustion engine. It's that big. And we are, it's hard to find information about it, like a think tank that's like compiled statistics. But I'm going to venture a guess here that 5% of the Earth's land surface is being sprayed yearly with chemicals that are obliterating all the vegetation that's there at the moment that the spray is occurring. And it's just utterly astounding what's happening. I've seen every year there is hundreds of thousands of acres of mesquite land in Texas that's being sprayed with herbicide. They want just grasses. They don't want the mesquite. Well, along with the mesquite, they're killing all sorts of other vegetation. They're just annihilating the native plant community. Now, if you mow the mesquite, you're mowing one plant. If you cut the mesquite with a chainsaw, you're killing one plant from this matrix of species. If you burn to kill the mesquite, again, you're doing something that landscape is adapted to. When you fly planes over it and dump herbicide on a 10,000 acre ranch, you are obliterating like 2/3 or 3/4 of the plant species on there. And don't tell me that's not affecting the wildlife.
Yeah.
And I showed you in the Pine Barrens, areas where they're spraying aerial herbicide after a clear cut. And these are areas that naturally were dominated by shrubs. They have really high densities of snowshoe hares, white-tailed deer, and black bears. Those are just the game animals, all sorts of non-game animals. And, it's going to take more than a human generation for those plants to recover. By the time that they would have recovered, they're going to be logging and spraying it again.
Are we talking about glyphosate? Or are we talking about a suite of herbicides that are being used?
Well, glyphosate is still the most important one by volume being sprayed, but as plants become resistant, they're coming out with new herbicides, a lot of which are more destructive or more toxic, scarier than glyphosate. But glyphosate itself is bad enough.
When we were in Hawaii recently, particularly when we were on Molokai, a place that had been, bombed by the U.S. military and ordnance testing, and then pineapple industry came in there and they just stripped the soil, and then after them it was cattle, and then it was like a collapse there, and there's not much left for an economy on that island, but Monsanto's there under the name Bayer. And there was this interesting conversation I had with a friend there which was like, yeah, it's Monsanto, but we try not to say too much because people need to work. So you're in one of those, but the jobs, every time you start to bring something up, the jobs, But sometimes I just feel like, when is humanity going to shake itself free from this company? I mean, Monsanto goes pretty far back, right? This is the folks who brought us Agent Orange. It's like, when are we going to be done with these folks? And what really bothers me with the herbicide thing is I don't understand this issue very well. In fact, I very rarely ever see anything being sprayed. It was interesting. My GPS took me initially to your neighbor's house, and when I was looking for your house, it was like, it must be here because I saw the do not spray signs. what's really bothersome to me is that it seems like a lot of times it's organizations that you think are involved in conservation or habitat restoration that are behind this spraying.
Well, this is sometimes happening, but I want to be clear that I'm not like blanket against all use of herbicide. I have trouble myself, I have trouble bringing myself to use herbicide, but I'm not anti-herbicide. I have a lot of friends who are farmers. They're conventional farmers. They are trying to make a living. They understand what they're doing with herbicides, but a tool has been created for them and it works really well for what it is supposed to do. But if we want this to be done differently, we need a solution that involves the people that are spraying the acreage and respects their livelihoods. And we're going to have to pay a little bit more for food if we want our food to be raised without the herbicides.
You're not making a blanket statement, but they're blanket using it, like they're spraying it from the air. So it's not like we're going around and I'm dripping a little bit on the base of this plant and a little over here, spot application. We're talking about blanketing whole environments with it, right?
Sure. But so I guess I think that, we all have our personal responsibilities in this process.
Sure.
So I'm trying to raise awareness about it so that people can make their personal choices. There's a bunch of potato fields not far from here between where you're staying and my house. And, if you're going to walk out there, people are going to be wearing a hazmat suit. The people that work there, they know how terrifying those potato fields are and what is sprayed on them. It's not glyphosate. And that idea is just terrifying to me, and then they're just above our water table. And they're growing on sand where it percolates rapidly. And I'm eating fish and wild rice from that watershed. That's just, the reality. But there are, I guess I would like to chip away at the edges of the completely useless use of herbicide or use of herbicide that I don't think can be justified. So when we have a public forest land that's supposed to be multi-use, it's recreational, it's timber, it's hunting, I believe that all those things can be met on a piece of public land. But when you decide that you're going to take a rich landscape and you are going to eliminate the native vegetation and replace it with red pine plantations, that's going way too far in the timber production.
Right.
Way too far towards
favoring one land user or one stakeholder above all others.
Right. It makes it just horrible for hunting after that point. As somebody who's hunted in some of these areas for 20 years, and the spraying only started 6 years ago. Well, it's been almost 30 years I've been hunting in these areas. It's just astounding. It's just devastating. And simple things like when you spray over a trout stream, could you please turn the sprayer off? Because they're not. I'm not saying they never turn it off, but the norm is to just spray right into the water. Sure. When we're spraying our lawns just so that they look a little more like AstroTurf, maybe we don't need our lawns to look like AstroTurf. Maybe some dandelions are okay in the lawn.
Yeah, I like some dandelions.
I love the look of dandelions in the lawn.
And I think the average consumer doesn't realize that we're no longer in the plow agriculture age. We are in the herbicide agriculture age.
Yes.
So, there's a euphemism for herbicide agriculture, which is called no-till. So when you hear someone say no-till agriculture, that means herbicide-based agriculture. So that's the euphemism that has confused the public that's not involved in farming or does not view farming on a regular basis. So it used to be if you had a field of alfalfa and you were going to plant that in, say, corn the next year, you're gonna plow it, you're gonna disc it and harrow it, and then you're gonna plant it at an opportune time. Today you're just going to spray all the alfalfa with herbicide, and then you're just going to you might disc it once, or then you're going to seed drill it into corn. A field that used to be left fallow. Fields often were planted with a cover crop, and rotation was very important to keep weeds out. Now it's oftentimes they'll let a fallow field just get completely choked with weeds because they just go over it with herbicide, and then they seed drill it, and there's never any plowing, tilling, disking. And there is some benefit to that, to the soil, but I'm not sure that it outweighs the ecological destruction of the spraying. So
when you say benefit, so what, mycorrhizal associations aren't being broken or
more in terms of the tilling promotes erosion.
Okay, but it's sort of like, okay, like similar to what you said, you're not against herbicides completely, but you'd like to see them used more judiciously. It's like, that's how I feel about antibiotics. Like living in a place where there's so much Lyme disease, I keep doxycycline on hand, but I think of it as the nuclear option. It's like I'm not going to just haphazardly take it, particularly because of what I've learned about my gut and my gut flora. So similarly, these herbicides have to have a huge impact on the soil microbes, right? Like
they must, and I haven't researched that a lot.
Sure,
I know what they do to the plants because I can see it.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's no doubt that it's having a profound effect on soil life.
It's got to be in the bears. It's got to be in the deer. It's got to be in the trout. Particularly, I would guess. I mean, most of these things seem to accumulate in lipids or get into your bones. I like to cook the bones down of the deers that I have, and I like to make stock out of it. And it's like, if I'm thinking that's glyphosate in there, it's like, man, it's hard to think about. So it's not, I just wish it didn't have all of these second and third order effects.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
So do you think, I guess kind of how we got here, is it possible the 13-lined ground squirrel becomes almost like a poster child for this issue for you in some way?
Well, we've all heard about the decline of the monarch butterfly. And the monarchs are pretty, and they fly to Mexico. That's so amazing. And it's unfortunate that the message hasn't gotten out as loudly that the monarch is only one of thousands of species that are equally imperiled. We have species after species that has been declining precipitously, just like the monarch, and for the same reason. Within the monarch research community, it's well known that the primary culprit is herbicide, but there are thousands of insects, and there is plenty of vertebrates that are disappearing because of herbicide. And the 13-line ground squirrel is one of them, and I kind of like it as an emblem of the herbicide problem, because there's personal responsibility on the shoulders of millions and millions of people who have decided they cannot share their lawn with dandelions or plantain or 13-line ground squirrels. But I grew up catching snakes. And it's, for those of us in the snake community who are interested in reptiles,
harps,
just to see all these beautiful snakes disappearing because they have no food. The red-tailed hawks don't have those 13-line ground squirrels. It's a major food source for red-tailed hawks. Badgers, in the Midwest, the two main foods of badgers are 13-line ground squirrels and pocket gophers. And, they're, especially the ground squirrels, are suffering from herbicide.
We were in the supermarket earlier today, Grant and I, and I'm trying to find something to eat, and I was just in my head, this monologue's going on where I'm like explaining to a person in the future or the distant past about this time in history where we've poisoned all our own food. Because every package you look at, all these ingredients that you're like, there's straight poisons in there. And it's like, even in like the health foods, and trying to like get somebody to understand, that that's what we've chosen to do. And somehow this is supposed to be good for humanity. It allows us to have more sick people. It's really strange.
Then you charge more for the food that's poisoned less.
It's a very, very odd time.
Yeah. Well, we're running on inertia because our ancestors had trouble getting enough food. And so we had this mindset of anything to make food cheaper, cheaper. It's like, don't you realize we're there? The food is actually cheap enough. What we need to do is how about anything to make food better? Instead of anything to make food cheaper. It's like you're outside, it's real cold, you have a coat on, you're bundled up, you're zipped up all the way to your chin, you got your hat on, then you come inside and it's like you'd never figure out you're inside. And then you're real hot and you're sweating and it's like you're inside now, you can take the coat off, you can unzip. Here we are, we've got enough food. I mean, look around. Just look at people. We've got enough food.
Obesity and diabetes are pretty good bellwether for that, huh?
Yeah. And we have enough food. Let's try to get the best food now.
29 cents a pound for bananas everywhere around here.
Yeah.
How? Yeah, that's what we were saying. How can you get bananas out of wherever they're being grown into... it's got to be a loss leader. They've got to be paying more. They've got to be paying at least that much or more for those bananas, right? 29 cents?
I don't know.
I just, as somebody who makes sugar, right? Like, what the value of your maple sugar, and then I go into the supermarket and I see a pound of white sugar for $1.99 or something. I just can't fathom how it can be done.
It's more like, isn't it like $1.99 for 5 pounds?
You're right. Sorry. Yeah. I was like, what's the inflation right now?
It's just so hard to believe.
It's unbelievable.
But also as someone who has worked in factories, I mean, I worked in a factory where we processed potatoes into potato powder, and we've made things just incredibly efficient.
Yep.
A $300,000 piece of machinery can sure harvest a lot of potatoes in a day.
Yeah.
And maybe potatoes don't have to be $4 for 10 pounds.
Right.
Anyone who's grown their own potatoes feels like they get a lot of food when they get 100 pounds of potatoes. I guarantee you they put more than $14 worth of effort into their 100 pounds of potatoes.
Yeah. So if this whole thing we're talking about, this, which sort of underlying it's what you just said, this obsession with like, we need more food. And if this idea of at any cost versus quality was like a bell curve, do you think we're still trending towards more pesticide, more low quality food, more preservatives, or do you think we've hit the top of that bell curve and we're starting to ride down the other side where people are starting to think like, wait a second, let's back off this, let's get better quality food, let's start to focus on that? Because I sometimes, just being immersed in a community of people who think that way, it's easy to think to yourself, oh, it's getting better. And I see signs like at the airports, we see a lot of food now that's way better than what we used to see 5-10 years ago. But like, this is opulent America. Like, is this what's happening in the world, do you think, or are we still sort of trended in the wrong direction?
So, actions tend to trail behind words by a few decades.
Yeah.
And I think that our actions are still trending to the worse. But at least we're starting the conversation. And that's why I've been trying to attract people's attention to what's going on with herbicide, because most people are getting their information from screens. And, and if someone isn't putting it on a screen and telling them a fact, they can't see the fact. They may see a sprayed alfalfa field and they don't even know what they're seeing. Yeah. People don't even know that it's alfalfa, much less that it was just sprayed with herbicide and that's why it's brown. So I would like to raise awareness about that. Maybe I can speed that up a little bit, because I feel kind of desperate just watching the nature around me get systematically destroyed. I was in Kansas. And I was in a lot of the Great Plains, the only prairies left are between the fence and the roadside, because on the other side of the fence, it's pasture or it's farmland and everything's destroyed. And then the roads, side between the fence and the road is not wide enough for anybody to do anything with. So there's these 15-foot wide or 25-foot wide prairies, very intact native plant communities. And I was at a place in Kansas, and they just decided, we're not going to mow these anymore. We're going to spray them with herbicide. And what people don't realize is that prairie plants live longer than forest trees. These are old growth prairies. Some of the plants in these prairies are thousands of years old. Many plants in these prairies are hundreds of years old. And the concept that there could be an old growth prairie hasn't occurred to people very much. But that's the reality of it. They live longer than trees.
Explain that, because what's the aerial parts of those plants aren't necessarily that old. It's the underground parts of those plants, if I understand it right.
Exactly. So they're herbaceous plants. They're growing up. They die back at the end of each growing season. But that root mass can survive for, we think of things as having lifespans. Like, humans live 70 to 105 years, and then we die.
There's an expiration date.
Exactly. Humans kind of have an expiration date. And trees, they grow to a certain size, and then their physiology can no longer support growth. Trees have to increase in size in order to survive. So trees
because they add a new layer each year as their cambia moves out one
exactly.
Ray.
So their vascular system only works with expansion. And so
infinite growth paradigm.
Trees reach a certain size and they die, right? When you
because structurally they can't no longer sustain themselves architecturally, or
because the new growth, the xylem that's moving the nutrients, if it doesn't increase at a certain rate in proportion to the size of the mass of the tree, it's not going to be able to support that new mass. So they reach this point of attrition where they just simply can't grow anymore.
It's like sort of what they've said about blue whales or some of the dinosaurs. Like, maybe there's an upper limit to like how big an animal could actually be. You kind of get this with trees.
Sure. Yeah. And so we can see there's a predictable maximum size for a tree.
Okay.
Right. But when you're talking, say, an aspen clone that can spread laterally underground, there's not a predictable limit here. It can just simply keep going. So not all, but many herbaceous perennial plants have a life cycle like this aspen clone, or like your asparagus or rhubarb plant. Like you could have a rhubarb plant when you buy a house in 1970, and in 2020, that rhubarb plant looks just like it looked in 1970 if you take care of it. And there's no way to know how old those plants are. But from everything,
there's no way to know.
Not
we
really.
don't currently have any technology to figure that out, or
as far as I know.
Yeah,
but
that's wild.
in plants that we've been, some of the individual plants that have been tracked, we have every logical reason to deduce that they can live for centuries and probably thousands of years. Wow. And so we're literally destroying these on roadsides with herbicide because someone made a decision that the herbicide is cheaper
on a whim
than the mowing.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing, I was seeing hundreds of miles of old growth prairie being sprayed with herbicide in Kansas, and after 5 or 6 applications, they're toast. Those plants are dead.
Wow, that's frustrating to hear.
Wow, it's almost like, what a travesty, like the idea of killing something thousands of years old just because some bureaucrat makes a quick decision, like probably a decision that's not really thought through. They're not looking at all the evidence or anything like that.
Sure.
They're just making it'll be better, it'll be less deer will nest in the side, it won't have any car accidents or whatever weird idea they've come up with, and man, they kill something that ancient.
Yeah, and most people don't have a clue. I mean,
killing a plant that was there when like the pyramids were built. You're like, put some glyphosate on that.
And that sounds funny, and like that's astounding, but that's the truth of it.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these plants literally are thousands of years old.
All right, so you just were talking about wanting to kind of put this on the screen for people, and something I wanted to say is our wild food community is fairly small, niche, and so something happens and there's like buzz that goes around, and one of the fun little bits of buzz this year is Sam Thayer is on TikTok. Because for the longest time, you've kind of just done things how you want to do them, right? You're not on social media, your web presence is pretty minimal. It's like a pretty in-person thing that you've done over the years, and everybody kind of goes to you as one of the main sources. But you haven't been broadcasting stuff out there except through your books, right? And your workshops and events and such. But then all of a sudden, it was so funny to me because it wasn't like Sam's on Facebook or Sam's on Instagram or like, I don't know, like any of the, what would you call them, almost like the sort of
introductory,
the entry level stuff.
You didn't ease into social
media. No,
you
jumped into like
the
because it'd be like Facebook for the boomers, right?
Yeah.
And then it's Instagram for like the millennials. You like went straight to like Gen Z and the TikTok, man. It's hilarious. It's awesome, but it was like, no, I was like, no way, And then I heard, yeah, his videos are really good. And then I saw your following is like growing really rapidly there. You seem to be doing really well. So tell us about that and that journey.
Well, I have a little bit of history a long time ago of doing stand-up comedy, and
Did you really?
I did.
I can see it now that you say it.
Yeah. And
we were talking about a movie made about you, a biography where you're played by some cross between Will Ferrell and Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And that's a compliment.
And last fall I was hanging out with Alexis Nelson, Black Forager. She was doing great on TikTok, and she's like, "Sam, you should do this. You'd be really good at this." And I have been thinking for the last 5 or 6 years is how can I get the message out here about herbicide? Like I really want to talk about this to people. And, I've been talking about it at presentations that I give. And then it just dawned on me. I'm like, well, if I can make TikTok work, I can at least, I can lure people in with funny little things to learn about herbicide, and so I've been trying to be goofy and draw people in, but at the same time, surprise people that someone being goofy actually has a lot of knowledge about this.
Yeah.
There's some people that they come in, they think I'm just goofy. They think I don't know what I'm talking about. And but that's just the reality of it. I like that because that means I'm reaching new people.
Yeah. You're casting such a broad net with it. Whereas I think because the work you've done in the past, it's a very high quality customer you end up with, but it's a very narrow pool of people.
Sure.
Whereas with TikTok, you're throwing a huge net, and maybe the size of the mesh is kind of wide, but like you're catching some interesting characters you never would necessarily draw in. And you know how it is. Sometimes a person just hears one thing right, and it changes the course of their destiny, So who knows, like, who you're affecting. And also you're getting access to a lot of young people, which is really cool because that's arguably more important.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt like, hey, just give me a little bit of your time. If I can convince you to try this cattail lateral, or if I can convince you to try a Cirsium horrigelum shoot, right, you're going to like it. I don't care who you are.
What's Cirsium? What
Oh, that's a thistle that's in the deep south that has this incredible
Oh, you were just telling me about that.
Yeah, that was my first TikTok video.
Okay.
Actually, was on that thistle. And if I can get you to put that in your mouth, if you will dare try, I will convince you. And I kind of feel the same way about, just come talk to me a little bit. I'm going to tell you about this herbicide thing and these 13-line ground squirrels, and I'm going to convince you that there's something worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And now when you walk out and look out at a lawn, you might say, why isn't there a 13-line ground squirrel on that lawn?
Yeah. What was compelling? You were making a video. We were on our way up to to harvest blueberries, and we stopped at a spot where there had been a large-scale herbicide application, which I don't know that I would have noticed.
No, I definitely
to be honest, I felt like a little ashamed of that. I was like, I don't know if I would have noticed this. But of course, with that sort of tracking style that you have of looking at the landscape, you brought us to the place where the truck had parked. And because they hadn't sprayed immediately around the truck, on either side of where you could see it. Once you pointed out, I could see the track. Here's where the truck was. On either side, all these hazelnuts are growing up. And it's like all this food right there, like dense food crop right around it. And then just this field of, I guess, horseweed and some mullins here and there.
It's about 98% horseweed the first year after those herbicide applications.
Yeah, so it was just this kind of uniform, desolate landscape trying to recover. And then this food where you're like, wait a second, did they eradicate all this food?
Yeah, I talked to the land manager of that area, and he said, well, we're only spraying herbicide on approximately 300 acres a year. I'm like, that's 3,000 acres in a decade, and it's going to take 50 years, 60 years, maybe 100 years to recover.
And why are they doing that?
That's to increase the yield of pine. They're planting red pine seedlings there, so it's to give them a little boost during the first 8 or 10 years of their life.
Like on the other side of that road was all those red pines. They had done that in 40 years before.
Well, when they had planted those red pines on the other side of the road, there was no herbicide. So they don't need the herbicide to grow. It's just they believe that it will make them grow a little bit faster. Mm-hmm. I would like to see the data on that because I doubt that it's very important of a gain in yield. And certainly it doesn't make up for the loss to wildlife, the loss to the watershed, and all the poisons being put on the land and the loss in diversity.
Right.
There's no way that it makes up for that.
That saying is the juice worth the squeeze.
Right.
It's like, yeah, we went and filmed this morning actually in the back of the Airbnb where we're staying in that red pine planting because it's just those rows and rows of these uniform trees and it looks so unnatural to the eye. And you had spoken a lot about this over the last few days, so we thought, let's go get some B-roll in there so we can show people what this looks like, because you look at it and it's very bizarre landscape, just this no understory and just red pines in rows that your eye picks up as man-made.
And that exact area behind your house there that you're renting, that indeed was an oak and pine barrens before it was planted like that. And Europeans came here and decided that the oak and pine barrens were worthless garbage, and so they needed to be replaced with something. The native people, for thousands of years, managed them for fruit and nut production. And in Maine, they're managing their pine barrens, for blueberry production. And I sure wish we could do something like that here because it's a multi-layer food. I mean, I bring people out in the barrens and they're just flabbergasted. I'm like, blueberries, tons of blueberries, service berries, hazelnut, sand cherry, these bur oak trees that are chest high that are loaded and drooping with acorns. It's just astounding how much food is there. And that's just the plant food. And
I was going to say, and then you have all the wildlife.
And then the wildlife. I mean, it's great hunting for deer, for bear, for ruffed grouse and sharp-tailed grouse where it's more open, snowshoe hares. It's just incredible.
So if tracking is about finding the present, putting together a story about the past in order to predict the future, I'd love to hear your speculations. Like, you looking back in geological time, right? Looking at this like past glaciation, the impact it's had on the landscape, all the way up through to how the native people lived on and managed these landscapes, then the collision with European culture and the fallout from that, which we're still arguably still just in that fallout in a sense. And then where do you see these tracks going?
Well, human behavior is a wild card, but I have places that I envision that I wish it would go, that I hope it will go, that I maybe cross my fingers and try to have some faith it will go, that we can, take indigenous management ideas and in apply that to the land to the extent that we can, because nature is resilient. We think of things as being forever when actually they could be fixed in 80 years. Mm-hmm. And people think, well, 80 years, I'm not going to be around in 80 years. Well, stop being selfish, because someone's going to be around in 80 years. And it's not like there's nothing as you're getting there either. So I, even though there's a lot to lament, mm-hmm. I feel like we are in the aftermath of colonialism. We're still sorting this out. And if we can take what this continent of North America offers to people, and we can manage it wisely and manage it where not only profit matters, but where good livings matter and good food matters and wildlife also matters, biodiversity matters, we have a paradise. Let's start living in it like it's really here. Let's start living in this paradise like we belong here, because we're here. We're here.
Yeah. You think the European mind is redeemable? Like, there's this sentiment right now in American culture that it's like irredeemable. You know what I mean? That's been like a conversation, I'd say, in the last 5-6 years. Like, get them out of here. Like, when I look at it and I go, like, man, applied correctly, the European worldview, combined with the indigenous worldview, combined with the African worldview and the Polynesian worldview and the Australian worldview. You know what I mean? Like, I see it combined in there. I think there's something really beautiful there. But then there is this sense of like, no, all it does is consume and destroy. Do you think that we can apply some of the thinking that led us to the technologies we have today, to go to space or build these phones or whatever it is? Can that kind of thinking that came out of Europe be sort of redeemed and turned towards good?
I think there's bad ideas and there's good ideas. Yeah. I don't think they belong to any particular group of people or lineage of people.
But when we say colonization, like, we're kind of talking about European people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I mean, this is the historical reality of what happened. I think that people work about the same way and think about the same ways, and there's a whole bunch of idiosyncrasies at play here. There's bad ideas that we need to expunge from our behavioral repertoire, and there's good ideas that we need to emulate. And I think we need to stop worrying about whose ideas they are or where they came from.
I love that.
What we keep finding is that the ideas keep repeating themselves over and over again. We also find that there's often geographical reasons for those ideas. Like, for example, why did Europeans, particularly Northwestern Europeans, not understand fire ecology? They went to Australia and they had no idea about fire ecology. They came to North America, they had no idea about fire ecology. Well, it's based upon the geography and the climates of those places they came to versus Western Europe. The western edge of the continent was not a fire-prone environment. Just like Alaska is not a very fire-prone environment either. There's sometimes obvious reasons for why people think the way that they do think. And we need to just, I think, forget about that. Just look at where we are and let's try to see what makes sense here with some basic principles of Aldo Leopold's land ethic, which resembles the way Native Americans talked about their land. Yeah. When you take, it's just the same thing in different words. So this idea of respecting the land as if the land itself and the biotic community on that land matters regardless of human beings. And then also say that human beings should treat each other fairly, and we should split up resources in such a way that our needs are met. I mean, you can apply this stuff anywhere.
Yeah, well said. I'm a huge fan of your 3 books. So it's The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and Incredible Wild Edibles, right? But there's a new book coming soon. and I just want to give you some space to talk about that. And when should we have our eye out for it?
Have a field guide. It's coming out on May 1st of 2023. That's been the date.
Oh, it's that soon.
I set that date 3 years ago, and I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
And so my field guide is going to be called Sam Thayer's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants of Eastern and Central North America. Long, cumbersome subtitle, but it's descriptive, and it has 676 plants in it.
Wow, that's an undertaking.
It's about a page per plant. Averages a little less than a page per plant. And it's in some ways it's the opposite approach of my other books, which go into great depth on each plant. But I'm not going to live long enough to cover all these plants in that depth. I won't live long enough to learn this much about all those plants. There's also a lot of plants that I have discovered, and I didn't discover them myself. I discovered them personally, but they were known before me. But I want to share these with people, and I'm not going to have time to write 6 or 7 more books like this.
Do you know how many plants are covered in your 3 existing books?
It depends on how you would divide them up. There's probably about 200.
Okay. So this is in all 3 books. So this is a pretty serious undertaking because I've heard you make mention of, I was just down in Texas looking for this plant. Oh, I was over here in Louisiana looking for this plant. So you had to travel around quite a bit just to even get in front of some of these species, right?
I did 8 trips a year for 8 years.
Wow.
to get the plants I wanted to cover in the field guide. So it was sort of like my fantasy from when I was a teenager coming true. Like, what if I could try all the edible wild plants in North America? And there's a few things I've missed, but I mean, there's stuff that I read about for years, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go down to Louisiana and find it. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go down to Mississippi and find it. I'm gonna go out to Nebraska and find it. Whatever it was, and it's been a blast. And I felt like I knew a lot about edible wild plants 10 years ago when I started working on this field guide, but I'm like, wow, I have learned so much that even if I don't sell a single copy, it's worth the 14,000 hours I put into it.
Will you self-publish it, or will it be published?
No, it's going to be self-published just like the others.
Badass. And then, I know it's probably a ways out, but I've been lucky enough to get to review a manuscript that you're working on about the origins of anthropology, which for me, I love the pragmatic and practical, but I also really love the philosophical. And this book's like a very different direction for you. And it's so hard hitting. And Sam, I know you keep writing me and be like, hey, give me any edits or any thoughts you have about it. It's like, I'm reading it. It's like, aside from a few places where you're like, I need to, add a detail here or make a footnote or a reference here. I mean, it feels like so complete. I have like nothing but compliments for it. I wouldn't change anything. So far from what I've read, I'm 7 chapters into it. And this book's going to have a pretty big impact, I think, way outside of your normal scope, because you're really getting to the roots and the origins of a lot of the issues that we're looking at culturally today, and a lot of the things that America is wrestling with. It's like you're getting right down to the root of where this idea of, dare I say, white supremacy, or what would you call it, or cultural supremacy? Like, you're kind of getting right at the root of it.
Well, what I call it is agrocentrism.
Yeah.
The idea that non-agricultural people are not human. Mm-hmm. And this was an idea that fueled colonialism. This was an idea that was, somewhat conceived to justify colonialism, but it existed in a milder form, less at the forefront of civilized psyche before colonialism. But I look at this as the origin of anthropology, the origin of agriculture, and the origin of food itself, and how all those things are connected. And I'm starting with asking this basic question: what's food, and why does it exist? These are 2 questions that there's almost no literature about, because just like people didn't think, what is gravity and why does it exist? It's just there. Food is just there. We don't think often about why is it there. So I spent a lot of my life asking the question, what is edible? But at some point I started asking, why is it edible? And asking a question, what do people eat? What do those people eat? What do those people eat? And then I started to ask the question, why do they eat it? And so this book is kind of the synthesis of those ideas. There's a lot. There's more to it than I want to cover quickly here.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot of podcasts worth. Well, what I find fascinating is, like, okay, racism is one thing, xenophobia is another thing. And I think xenophobia is like, that's going to be hard to tackle because I think it's kind of built into people. It's like, sometimes what we call racism is just xenophobia.
Yeah.
You know, and it just gets lumped in. It's all racism. It's like, well, let's pick it apart a little bit because people get a little bit weird about outsiders until they get to know them. And that's just reality. And I don't know how you work around that. But this idea of this colonialist idea, well, that's kind of explainable here. You've kind of really, I don't know, it's a tremendous offering, I think. And it's, what I love about it is it's such a departure from what you're known for, yet it's so authoritative. I just think it's going to have a really big impact on people, and what I love about it too is it tackles two things simultaneously. One is the social issue, but then it really gets underneath, and it's at that gustatory level, that alimentary level, the food level. Because to me, a lot of these social problems, I think you and I probably see this similarly, but it's like food underlies a lot of this stuff. And so I love that how you approach food reveals a lot of the origins of the thought process that led to all this colonization and oppression in the world.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell.
Which kind of nut, Sam?
Well, a big shellbark hickory. Right? In a big shellbark hickory nutshell, as agricultural people expanded and wanted to take land and resources from non-agricultural people, in fighting a war with people, in destroying a people, you need to psychologically prepare yourself by dehumanizing them. That's how the human psyche works in war, in fatal conflicts. And so the colonial period, Europeans expanding out, they had a psychological need to dehumanize the people who they were brutalizing, and they did so largely through their food. And there's two primary ways that people were dehumanized through their food. They were either savages, which meant hunter-gatherer in those days, or they were cannibals. And so both primary means of dehumanization were through food. And what's interesting is in the literature on dehumanization today, it skips both of those. Yeah. All the other reasons for dehumanization, there's lots written about in the dehumanization literature. But they skip the part about food.
Because the people writing it are agrocentric and don't know it, though, right? That's the thing.
Largely. Yeah. I actually have a big compendium of essays about dehumanization, and there's only one that refers to dehumanization of hunter-gatherers, and it is referring to the native Tasmanians. And it in itself is a blatantly dehumanizing essay. So all the other essays in the book are anti-dehumanization, and then this only one that refers to hunter-gatherers is itself explicitly dehumanizing. And so it's amazing. It's disturbing the extent to which anthropology was an integral part of the colonial project, and the extent to which today it is denying its own origins.
I'm fascinated by modern anthropology, so it was disturbing to come across this. Also, side note, Tasmania, home to the largest crayfish in the world.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I want to see a picture.
Oh, man.
It gets up to 11.9 pounds.
No, 13 pounds.
Wow.
Oh, really?
13 pounds, although today they're mostly 2 to 5.
Yeah.
That's what I was reading last night. I went a little deeper last night.
So what makes a crayfish versus a lobster? Is it just the freshwater?
I think it's the freshwater component. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, what did I want to say? Oh, do you, and maybe this is a punchline you're not ready to reveal, but do you want to say anything about that theory of edibility? Is that something you want to keep close to the chest until you publish it?
Well, I've been talking about this actually for like 10 years in workshops. Yeah. I would have to explain this for people to really understand it, but disturbance times seasonality times fertility equals food.
Oh, man. All right. When are we going to be able to read about that?
Oh, I don't know. And things take me a while because I try to dot all the I's and cross all the T's.
Well, it's a good teaser, man. So let people know about, and I know you don't have any issues booking out these days, but let people know about how do they get to an event, a workshop, a talk, the food products you have for sale, and then, of course, your TikTok, which everybody needs to know about.
Well, my website's foragersharvest.com, and you can buy my books there, or you can buy them at whatever bookseller you want to support. They're pretty easy to find. And if you're interested in a fascinating native food plant with an incredible sustainable potential, the yellow bud hickory oil, I'm probably the only person in the continent you can buy it from right now.
That is that you sent me a bottle, and thank you for that. It was so delicious. Because it can you can use it a lot of ways, but it's got almost like a desserty flavor to it. It's so nice.
And we'll be having some more tonight. I got a gallon in the fridge there.
Oh, cool.
My TikTok is WellFed Wild.
Well-fed wild.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to copy.
I know. I'm like looking at my logo going, hey, wait a tick.
Yeah.
No.
I got kind of pushed into that name.
Oh, that's great, man. We're really happy for you, man. And we're really excited to make this episode of the show around you, too. So that'll come out probably this winter of 2022 into the winter of 2023, right?
Yep.
It should come out. So we're really excited to have you on it. So thank you for playing along and your patience this week, and particularly, how hard it is with production. It's a lot of stopping and starting and waiting, and just thank you for playing along with us this week. It's been awesome.
Oh, you guys have been great, and it's been a fun time.
Any songs you want to sing to take us out?
Oh yeah, we got to go out with a song.
Oh, I'm not ready to do a song.
Come on, well, we got time. We're patient.
You mean one of my songs?
Yeah,
yeah,
your
one of
songs.
Oh man,
You got that chicken song? It's so good, the fried chicken song.
I got two new songs. I haven't presented them a lot in person. I have a Wild Rice song.
Well, there's nothing like having these headsets and mics, man. If you want to just rip a tune.
I don't know, man.
We can edit it out.
Actually, if I share something really personal, because I've found that just let it rip and wear your heart on your sleeve, make yourself vulnerable. I visited Alexis last fall, and
Where is she?
she's in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And I was going to West Virginia, so it worked out perfect. So she also had a history doing stand-up comedy, and we talked a little bit about our experiences and a lot of similar emotional reactions and thoughts based on that comedy experience. And when I did comedy years ago, I sang a lot of goofy songs, just my comedy act. And so I was driving back, and Alexis had really encouraged me in a lot of ways. And I was feeling great, feeling kind of high on life. And then I thought, I was like, okay, God, you gave me this gift to write songs. What the heck for? I don't use this for anything. Like, my songs are just about wacky, crazy stuff. There's no edible wild plant songs. There's nothing related to anything I even care about. I'm like, if I'm supposed to be using this gift, give me a song about something that matters to me, and then I'll use it. And then I just, boring, long drive through the Midwest, and a couple hours later, this song just hit me, this Wild Rice song, which I don't know if I'm emotionally, mentally prepared to sing it on your podcast. Okay, I got to stand up for this, yeah. I got a 14-foot pole and my baby's got rice knockers. I'm standing up and she's my boat rocker. Cedar in both hands, she holds the wood, leans back in the boat and swings them good. I keep that skiff and the stick slick moving. I push my pole and she picks my Newman. We make straight lines, no figure eight roaming. We don't waste time because we'll be going home and bringing back 4-pack sacks of Monoman. See, I didn't understand when she married me that she wouldn't lend a hand, she would bury me and rice to my knees. I didn't understand how nice it could be to have a rice knocking baby rocking my canoe, to have a nice rocker baby who could do what she could do. Woo! I got a 14-foot pole and my baby's got rice knockers. I'm standing up and she's my boat rocker. Ow! She's got some nice terms for the rice worms. I'd tell you what she calls them, but it's something improper. The bastards might bite, but that ain't gonna stop her. It's not a competition, but nobody can top her. So when we get Newman home, we burn a fire down the coals, put the copper on the rocks, and I'm ready to roll. Get a paddle in the kettle, it'll crackle if I stop trying to parch it, not a puff it. I don't want to hear a pop. Let me see that black dust. I'll pull this batch off, put those mocks on, and rub this chaff off. Now I'm dancing in a barrel. I'll be sweating till I drop, and she's snapping that tray, sucking dust off top. Anyone who thinks that this is too much work, might have thought that once, but then I ate some. I got a 14-foot pole and my baby's got rice knockers. I'm standing up and she's my boat rocker. We slow down, turn around, the sun is almost set. We got a lot of Newman, but we ain't done yet. There's a muskie in a creek and a turtle on a log. Mist is coming off the water and it's turning into fog. A muskrat on a rock cutting up stalks. A bittern takes off, looks pissed and he squawks. McGeezy, he sees me and there's teals going under. We hit the next bed and it's blackbirds like thunder. I bow my head, drop tobacco and wonder. Lord, when I I go? Can it be here I go under? But if you give me 35 and I'm still alive on September 5th, I'll be here doing this, standing up tall and pushing this pole, bringing in the good seed, more precious than gold, because I love my woman and I love my Newman, and rice is life, and life never gets old.
Yeah. The incredible sounds of Sam Thayer. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. Help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 10 episodes. Season 2 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2022. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.